I'm so pleased to see you here. So this is a special session on successful adaptation to climate change, talking about sort of a framework for thinking about success, and then a conversation, a group conversation, or actually small group conversation. So please sit at a table if you're going to be part of the discussion, to sort of unpack how we might measure or evaluate our progress towards success. So what we're going to do today is we're going to begin with a brief presentation by myself. I'm Amy Snover, by the way, from the Climate Impacts Group at University of Washington. And sort of introductory presentation on what we mean when we're talking about successful adaptation, or actually more to the point, the questions that talking about successful adaptation raises. And then we're going to have a sort of combination of a World Cafe or breakout group activity where we're going to have 3 rotations to talk about different dimensions of success in relationship to a specific adaptation effort of interest to you. We're going to have a really brief debrief at the end. So table captains, remember, you know who you are if you're a table captain, that we're going to have, a quick speed report out so that we can get you to lunch. So I'd like to begin by a quick thank you and telling you where this work came from. This is part of a bigger project on successful climate change adaptation on the U.S. West Coast. It says coastal adaptation, climate adaptation. This was a Sea Grant funded project that was a collaboration with researchers in California, Oregon, and Washington, and funded by everybody and their brother, you can see, and we really like everybody and their brother for their support that they've given to us. So, successful adaptation, key dimensions of an elusive goal. So this project came out of conversations each of us was having with practitioners primarily, but also scientists and academics up and down the West Coast about what does this mean? What are we trying to do? And how do we know if we're getting there? We also were experiencing pressure from a lot of foundation-funded research or activities around climate change adaptation, with a push to do some monitoring and evaluation and prove success to qualify for additional funding, prove success within a couple of years, and the frustration that those kind of requirements arose. We also have a broadening national conversation around indicators of success through the National Climate Assessment and others. This is a really kind of hot area to be in right now, with a lot of conversation but not a lot of decisions. So into this foray we jump. So when we think about successful adaptation to climate change, the very first thing on our mind is what does success look like? And success is in the eye of the beholder, but as we delve into it, I think we realize that we come at this issue based on the organization we're with, what our objectives are within that organization, or our own framing of adaptation to very different perceptions of success and definitions of success. So let's just have some illustrative examples here. Is success being careful, having good notification systems about what's going on? Is success being able to get out in time before the really bad thing happens and have a well-established social system for dealing with that? Is success rising again when something happens? So this is after Katrina. This is also reopening the New York Stock Exchange. We did not stop for long. Right? We came back. Is success going on anyway in things that are important to us in life as the environment changes around us, or other aspects of systems change around us in ways that we might not actually declare optimal? So these are people doing, I forget what it's called. But isn't it the other one, the one that was outlawed in China, in not very good. Yeah, that one, Falun Gong, in poor air quality. Don't drive on this road unless you want to have salt. Damage on your vehicle. We have warnings. Another great image was of a church in Norfolk, Virginia, with a quote from the pastor saying, "Not many people have to check the tide charts before they decide if they're going to church or not, because the in and out road there is flooded. So what is success? Is it still doing it? We just keep going? And then it gets into questions about trade-offs, right? So the coastal zone, admittedly not necessarily relevant in Idaho, but is a really interesting place to look at this issue, because it really forces acknowledgement, like clear-eyed looking at the trade-offs that often have to come. So is success protecting our properties and our on the coast, or is success maintaining the public access to our resources along the beach? And where do ecological values fit in there? And I am setting up perhaps straw men dichotomies that are unresolvable, but we know that this is at the root of how a lot of management decisions are made and a lot of public priorities come from. And so the question is, what is success in these areas? Or is success that we're working together on this? Is success that we have a functioning democracy where we're transparent about the decisions that we make? We come together as a society and we decide where we want to go, and we work and adapt and do our best to get there. Or is the answer all of the above? In which case I'll say good luck with that, right? I think another interesting aspect about doing this work in the coastal zone is that there's a lot of, I think, there's a lot of desire, wishful thinking, and hope that we can find win-win situations, right? Win-win solutions. And in the coastal zone, sometimes we have to ask whether that's really possible. As sea level rises and coastal properties are damaged or inundated permanently, how can we say there will not be loss? So what does success look like in terms of facing that loss and distributing it appropriately? So lots of tough questions. How much can science help with this in terms of bringing a knowledge of adaptive systems, of what climate we might expect, of how we might effectively protect ecosystems in a changing climate? Or is it all subjective and political about what we believe success to be and how we can work through the conflicts and differences of opinion to get us somewhere? What is the right scale at which to consider success, right? If we do a great job of barricading our coastal community from erosion, we may successfully save our downtown while we scour all of the neighboring beaches. How much and how do we actually integrate across sectors and across scales and levels of government, right? We know these are wicked problems that we're facing, and climate change pulls a lot of threads in highly connected systems. And so how do we determine success in working across all of those levels? How do we address trade-offs? When can we declare success or not? Is now a time when we can say we have successful adaptation? Do we say that in 20 years? Do we say that in 50 years? I think the question that we're wrestling with in this project is the desire to have something reasonable to say about our success at any point in time that recognizes the ongoing trajectory of climate change. How should we measure it, and who gets to say? Is it the coastal property owner, or is it the beach walker? So why are people thinking about success? And there are a lot of dimensions to this, right? We want to talk about it for communication and public engagement purposes. It's really helpful if we have a positive vision, if we know what we're trying to do, and we can describe it in successful terms for engagement purposes. It helps with deliberate planning and decision making. If we actually know where we're trying to get, it can shape our decisions in a thoughtful way. Interesting analysis of California coastal adaptation plans found that a tiny percentage of them, under 10%, actually articulated what the goal of the adaptation in that plan was. How do you make decisions if you haven't decided what you're trying to achieve? We want to justify adaptation expenditures either because we're asking for money or because we're proving we spent it well. That bleeds into accountability and good governance, accountability for our actions. Support for learning and adaptive management is another reason people think about trying to evaluate the success in their process. We know that climate change is an ongoing, evolving future. And so successfully adapting to it requires some change over time. If we want to do that learning, we might want to have some definition of what we're trying to do. And then not least, the bottom one, which really should be about the top, which is that there's a bigger goal here, right? Which is safeguarding, maintaining, or creating thriving people, economy, infrastructure, cultural assets, and an environment as we move forward into a changing climate. So there's also good reasons not to think about adaptation success. I'm not going to be so naive as to think that they're not. These are pretty obvious, right? There's political sensitivities. If we actually head-on address trade-offs, that doesn't always go over so well. We also want to be able to show that we've succeeded. So there's often a desire to define success in a way that aids that. There's certainly funding sensitivities and the issues about talking about long-term change and capacity building on short funding cycles. It takes work, it takes capacity, it takes funding. There's lots of reasons not to think about it. So this gets I just want to give you a brief introduction to the project that underlies this. I mentioned before it was a 3-state effort on the West Coast. And what we did is we gathered at the beginning of the project a combination of, I guess, basically .edu and .org folks to talk sort of based on scholarship about how success might be construed. So we had ecological economists, we had geologists and geomorphologists, we had ecologists, we had philosophers discussing these different dimensions of success and the perspective that their fields have brought. Then we had workshops in each individual state, Washington, Oregon, California, in which we gathered at those workshop practitioners in the coastal arena who have been grappling with climate change issues. So this is not the new ones, in a sense, that we're bringing on board to try to, give them, get them going or help them start. This was people who have been grappling with these thorny issues themselves and have perspective on whether how they've evaluated their own progress and how they have been evaluated. And then at the end we had a capstone workshop where we brought representatives of both groups back together and tried and put together some of the findings about what science or scholarship says about success, and there's a long literature on that going back to 1990, and what practice says. And we found that, not surprisingly, there's similar but different, right? There's overlapping perspectives, and then there's very different perspectives that I think are useful in bringing together. So I'm going to walk you through some top-level findings and then give you a quick snapshot of the picture on your worksheet that encapsulates these and get us going into some discussion that I think will be more interesting than listening to me. So top-level findings. What is success depends in part on how you interpret adaptation. Perfect. So is adaptation to climate change avoiding harm? Like keeping now the status quo. We got what we got and we don't want to lose any ground. So you define success pretty differently if that's what your goal or your definition of adaptation is, compared to a sort of vulnerability framework of adaptation, which is that we want to make sure that those most vulnerable are not harmed by climate change. So we focus on the least able to adapt or the most marginalized. Another way of thinking about adaptation is that we all actually thrive and that we create the world we wish we had, that we restore beyond where we are now, and we create systems and ways of managing that we are striving for today. So that's sort of the resilience frame of adaptation. So status quo, hold the line, vulnerability, help the least, or most threatened, and sort of resilience, make a better world for all. And people come actually with implicit framings of adaptation. And it's very interesting to watch us try to talk to each other when we have these implicit framings where one of us is in one camp and another is in another. And we have very different ways of measuring and defining success. Okay, it's a lot harder to define success than failure, right? We got a lot in these workshops about, well, I know what it doesn't look like. And an absence of those bad things is one way to define it, but I don't think anybody thinks that's sufficient. So that's a place to start, but then what can we add on to that? Success is always multidimensional. Hold on to that thought. It's the next slide, I'll go into that more. While there may be positive synergies, often success in one area involves trade-offs in others across sectors and scales. I think I've already talked about that some. And that there is no final success, as adaptation is an evolutionary process. So this leads to discussions about success being progress. If progress is being made, if we get to the next step, if we do the next thing, and we do that well, that's success, because we know we have to keep moving. So through this work, sort of this the technical term smooshing of the science and the practice perspectives led to us to develop this sort of framework of 4 key dimensions of adaptation success. And they're shown in the 4 boxes in the middle. So we separate the adaptation effort for this purpose into these 4 boxes. So one is adaptation process, the whole process about engagement, communication, decision making, evolving over time, and we can evaluate how we're doing that process. So success might be getting the assessment and planning process right, or engaging in continual assessment. There's lots of different markers for success that could go in that box. Another one that's actually a subset of that, but worth pulling out on its own, is adaptation decision making. When decisions are actually made to do something, be it build something on the ground or build internal capacity, when those decisions are made, were they successful decisions? Were they made well? And we can evaluate that. Adaptation implementation, okay, you've decided to do something, now you've done it. Can we measure success at that? That is often the most straightforward thing. I said I was going to restore 50 acres of coastal wetlands. I restored 55 acres of coastal wetlands. Ching-ching, right? As soon as I say that, you'll say to me, but does that matter? Does that actually increase your resilience, or does that lead you to an adapted system? And that's the next box, which is outcomes. Like, how is the world different in terms of what we've done? And I think the first 3 aren't too far afield from what people often do in their daily lives, but climate change adds an additional interesting dimension to them, whereas the outcomes box is really one of the most difficult to discuss. There's something else I wanted to say about this, and I'm trying to think about it. There's a lot of conversation in adaptation world about barriers to be overcome, about funding, and about institutional motivational barriers to change. And a lot of the interesting research on barrier has shown that, like this success, it's very useful to parse that discussion into the different components of adaptation, because the barriers at one stage are very different than the barriers at another, similar to the capacity that one might need to do this. So here's what I was trying to remember that I wanted to say, which is that I often think of this as like the jokes of the blind men and the elephant, right? So the elephant, the whole kahuna, to mix my metaphors, is successful adaptation. That is the goal. But in achieving that, we think about different parts of it at a time. And so the adaptation process might be the trunk of the elephant, and the adaptation outcomes might be the tail of the elephant. So it's useful for a while to spend our time focused in more specifically. While please don't ever think that I think that a tail defines an elephant. We add it all up again at the end. So there's a quick overview of our thoughts and framework. Before I introduce the activity and get us going, I just want to see if there's any comments or questions that people want to raise at this time. Yes?
One thing I didn't see in there was like time frames. Like when do you, I mean, we're looking out in the future, 20, 50, 100 years. Don't that got to be part of the...
Yes, that's a great question. So Amy's going so fast that she leaves off that arrow that goes around and around. So the idea that we try to bring to this is right now, how can you evaluate where you are and what you're doing in the context of this recognition that this is a long time frame event, and that while you may be able to implement things now, your outcomes you would evaluate on a longer time scale. So that is one of the thorny issues about defining adaptation goals and evaluating success, is over what time frame are you doing that. And I would argue that a conscious attention to that and some decisions about what time frame is being targeted is actually an ingredient that leads to success, is a criteria that we could use in many of these arenas or dimensions.
One thing that I've struggled with too is the kind of, when adaptation is done but it's not called out as adaptation, so either when it's like mainstreamed into some larger sustainability effort, or it's this kind of dawning awareness after the fact, like, oh, that thing we did will also be good at climate change. Kind of like how you build that into a success story when it was never really intended to be adaptation in the first place. I don't know if you have any sort of guidance on where to place that in these kind of buckets of the adaptation success.
I think that's a great thing for discussion. I would, I imagine it can go in multiple, but the first thing that comes to mind for me is the outcomes side. If you look at those, an ancillary effort that was done for another reason, so is not going to be evaluated in my goal was adapting and so I implemented this. The reason you're saying it's relevant to adaptation is because it made a difference on the ground in the world in a way that you think contributes to resilience. So, to give a bad example, if we were building a new dam to make a bigger reservoir for our city water supply because population is growing, without thinking about snowpack diminishing and needing additional water supply, but yet that provides us that freeboard and buffer we need for adapting to climate change, you could put that in the outcome bucket. One more quick and then I'll get us going.
Just commenting on that, it seems like where that gets separated what is it, a new problem that you're addressing, or is it a pre-existing problem that gets exacerbated by climate impacts, right? Because if it's a new problem,
that you're addressing, you probably don't have a way. It wasn't addressed before, so you are talking about a new approach to dealing with it. So I think that is one. I think that's definitely one distinction. Yeah. So I'd like to get us going. So we're having a combination of sort of World Cafe breakout group discussion, and the goal here is to explore these dimensions of success related to a specific adaptation experience or effort of interest to each of you, and then from that to extract some more general conclusions that you could walk out of here with. So the basic idea is that this is a creative and interactive brainstorm, and it says not debate, discussion, or critique, although if you think some of this stuff is baloney and it could be improved, we sure want to hear that. So specifically what you're going to do is consider a specific climate change adaptation effort from the perspective of 3 of these 4 dimensions of success, just based on time here. We're going to identify some characteristics or requirements for success in each dimension. I've sort of listed a few. There are a few on the picture, but we want to broaden that out. And then talk a little bit about indicators and metrics for measuring this. So the format is that you're at a table, and please join a table when we say go to take part in the discussion. And at that table, each table is going to do one of the dimensions of success. So at the beginning of this first rotation, we're going to ask you to identify a specific adaptation effort of interest to you, something you're familiar with, that happened, you want to have happen. It doesn't matter what it is. Maybe you want to change building codes to account for sea level rise. Maybe you want to recover salmon in the Nooksack under a changing climate. and you're going to jot that down, and then you're going to use that specific example to explore this. So you'll then discuss at your table, focused on the particular dimension. When we go bong, time changes, the facilitators will move, so you don't have to move, and then you'll do it again for the same effort, the same adaptation project, but a different dimension. Make sense? Here's our table hosts, myself, Lara, Mead, Joe. We're all from the Climate Impacts Group, and I think I'm just going to say, go. What am I forgetting to say, Lara?
So we have a small room, and
that's what I'm supposed to say.
We definitely want you to fill in on tables. If you will need to make some space for additional people, so maybe we can back up a little bit. We can kind of push this table a little bit that way. But the main thing is the noise level. So as I say to my children, let's use our inside voice. But just be cognizant of the fact that your neighbors at the other table are also trying to have discussions. So we want to try to keep noise levels down. We're going to keep those back doors open to see if that helps give the noise a place to go. But your help with that would be really appreciated.
So the format was we were doing about 20 minutes,
Yeah,
maybe
about 18 minutes.
18 minutes. That's about 20 for each dimension. So
But
yes,
is each person coming up with something they want to do, or is it
each person comes up with something, an adaptation effort of interest to them. And you jot that down at the top of your worksheet so that then you are putting, thinking about adaptation at the beginning, that dimension specifically for your adaptation effort. And then we have a group discussion.
And if you don't have a worksheet, we've got some. So raise your hand if you don't have a worksheet and you're sticking around.
So we're going to begin with the table captains just making sure people know what dimension they're focusing on at their table once they've come up with their idea of adaptation effort.
Okay, so you've got our sheets, right?
There might be a couple more people.
So the first thing,
There are a couple chairs over here.
Yeah.
take a few minutes, think about an adaptation.
There's an open seat over here. And there's room, there's definitely room for another chair over here.
There's two, one more sheet. So, each table is one of these. Our tables is implementation. Now, and then after 20 minutes, I'll leave someone else to take it. So the first thing to do is think about this. It can be one thing.
And so what we're going to do is on your worksheet, you're going to choose a specific. So go to, so on the front of your worksheet, very much, don't go there yet, go back to the front. There is step 1, you're going to choose a specific adaptation effort that you're going to focus on by your possible all. I don't know.
And think about in this first
So pick out a adaptation about just collision of two worlds. So you spend all day trying to figure out
You might be actually dealing with right now.
yes, so you're going to be dealing with what you'd like to deal with. So you can about how you
to also link what would you
So we're going to be focusing on process. It happens to be the first and so what I'd like to do is reflecting on the adaptation and just identify take a few minutes to think about what are those traits of success. How do I know my process around this issue?
how much did you actually source? And so measuring that.
And then as you do that, also see how would you know
But there can be other traits.
testing that traits.
So does that make sense? And we're going to reflect this basically on the table, but thinking about it.
is identifying successful environments. So starting with characteristics of successful adaptation. So we have characteristics, behaviors, and metrics. So, for example, a characteristic that your decision was based on which signs. This is how figures you can think of several different characteristics that would make that decision successful. The difference between that characteristic and an indicator would be how would you know that person would get so mine's more a water expert panel, you know, and think about your relied on isolation. So that would be an indicator that you had in fact been science. And then a metric would be some sort of variable representing that could be there. So we didn't assume that we reviewed 50 So something that you can actually okay, so great. I'm gonna be
So I think perspective.
for the next one, 10 minutes or so, I'd like to do some study. This just think about all the two lines of first now indicators. There are the questions about
So that would process.
I'm still actually my own
Mine runs the gamut. So it starts out with kind of conceptual analysis portions. So mine was thinking of dealing with children's days in the city of Seattle among vulnerable populations and also especially outdoor workers.
So that's the adaptation effort.
And so the first would be like a technical analysis of areas, so urban heat islands or areas where there are large elderly populations or other vulnerable populations, to know what those target areas are. And also an analysis of existing policies and infrastructure.
I think
Might already deal with it.
So you're doing assisted migration.
Then a best practices assessment, pulling out what other municipalities have done in this realm, seeing what else is out there. And then also in the process, the government level bringing together different sectors like public health, words, other leaders for discussion.
I guess you could do this for
kind
any
of
of the
community
items
feedback, input process, and then also even just the generating of options and weighing different options in the process.
Part of the decision if you want to
And the reality that you guys are showing negative
as well as the community approach.
despite working at
I want to potentially come back to some of those because I want to hear.
And I think
push
once
deeper on
Amy
some
said it was across me, because I deal with this all the time, is that we get so involved with process to do
Coming from
something,
Seattle,
but we
there's a lot
really
of
have to
process in
find out.
Seattle.
What is it behind the ball run? And so we spend a lot of time running in circles and doing a lot of exercises, and then at the end of the day, we don't really have anything to show that for what we've done, because we've never done it backwards. So when I was thinking of this exercise, I was thinking that what we could do in step one would be kind of related to the goal. What is the long-term goal we're trying to achieve, and then each of these characteristics would be like objectives, things that we might be able to do that would be maybe one step or part of the process.
Okay, we have a few ideas now, and it's okay.
That's how I was sort of.
I think you
So I had that as a metric for the next year over the process, so I'm actually.
Yeah, it's
To me, we talk about successful, characteristic of successful adaptation would be that.
And one of our winning initiatives is conservation and restoration of red herring.
I think it's easy for, it's easier for you to
Different watersheds. And for my indicators I have,
So you're talking about
net
seawall,
acreage riparian
you know, building a seawall is not the goal, building a seawall is
and water
a
temperature.
process of achieving something else, which would
That we're
protect
looking at
property.
with climate change.
So you would really, you would say that there's a goal for adaptation.
And the other indicator I had was the support of
And,
the
build a water break.
and the method.
And I think it's just a matter of because they specifically making it disabled, so because as far as I know,
process is actually buy-in of the tribal members. And then indicators of that would be the tribal
I'm
council
gonna let you
decision
all
making
write
to actually
and
move the tribal
introduce
center
you.
is one of the processes to do that. And then the
It's interesting that they use about seawall to,
they do a large area
water sources, yeah, it's been coming up with new docks. And I was wondering, how are they taking into consideration climate change, rising sea water? And I assume they probably have, but I didn't know.
surrounding communities.
Right,
And
yeah,
they
yeah,
find
yeah.
to realize that in our case, the ramifications of climate change on conservation and
yeah, there, it's storylines.
So that's a good kind of, you know, reference that.
So my example, I'm here in the San Juan Islands, Washington State, and one of the things I'm more concerned about is just overall forest health and biodiversity there. It's not taking a big subject at all. And so one of our issues is that there's a majority of lands in private ownership, so a lot of that. You know what that's what you're talking about?
Actually, I think that's the beginning.
Side of
I
the
wasn't.
so some of the successes might be trying to come up with a plan looks at things across those boundaries and gets an idea of just what are the existing conditions. Once you have that, then you're looking at analysis of those existing conditions, projected conditions, and desired conditions are.
So, there's
Thanks,
been a
Angela.
number of
Any
things that I'm
others?
looking at. You're starting to get,
so
the community
Brian,
buy-in.
thanks.
It's kind of like, I wanted to know
Oh, I see. Social scientist and
So, some of the things that we think about, like the process, are it doesn't have a successful process. Do you have all the necessary
So those are status.
and how we virtual, and so that we use that in the paper. As long as you've got, all those people participating in necessary workshops, using the information that's been brought in to try to inform the process.
So is this an indicator of success?
Well, no, a trait would be, one of the traits that we must do would be done about industry as much as they should.
So the hosting of the virtual workshop successfully, and they do, but you have to use it. Would already kind of to say this was a success, so the representation for second groups. I don't know if it's already, but you want to shout out some outreach as the driver and
If anyone want to just, as you're already, you want to throw out some characteristics.
And then now what are your indicators and metrics would be distribution of risk?
So, whether there are right things that
So that would be an action, that would be a decision, where would you
and how we can
the
institutions, or actually institutional health facilities, how this in particular moves to social science or adaptation workshop. And then,
So that's definitely a process to build into, but it can also be where,
the audience
that can be like success criteria, should you get
and then perhaps also there's more than just totally along generality that you did with the local association because especially at different levels of government, it sounds like you're not based on broad so it's not too good
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been kind of listening and trying to put this
3 is a very broad term. I'm just going to kind of scribble it down. That is, our challenge is to get understanding of how large-scale environmental change, climate is one piece, maybe not even the largest piece, but an important piece, impacts water quality and coastal landscape. What levers can we use to manage that, and how can we move the levers? And so that's 3 kind of nested pieces where the science isn't fully understood, the management response isn't understood, and how the stakeholders come together isn't understood. But there's a structure that's moving forward trying to get there. So I'm kind of trying to grasp how to fit all of that into this structure right now.
It might help to, so, again, putting it back into the what's not to take action, is it that that's so, rather than going to do kind of big action goals, we're trying to get
But a lot of it hinges on.
I mean, there is the need to consider success for us in the broader picture. When you start understanding that.
That was the one place that there's a lot of build out down there. A lot of levees built.
So I guess that has maybe a little bit more.
So trying to bring it to the operating
We wanted to
so perhaps that comes with
as much as possible. How do we get there? And so one big piece is just so that's what I chose, as well as so that goes
so I'm not trying to push you all the way to that, but
So thinking about it, I mean, at that level, it's not
and so indicators are like
So, when we did this, we did such a large national adaptation forum, and, you know, the kind of
well, so
things that
that's
come out of
the
that process.
that's
and
not
we
what
said
the
this
path
is-
forward.
a lot of it is
If you decide to
Disadvantage to disenfranchise
indicators.
So, and this is coming out of a lot more in conversations around climate adaptation efforts and actions towards the equity component.
Yeah, I think that was
So,
Which obviously
particularly
are
most of
great, but suitable habits and decisions. Creating more of that.
the more disenfranchised population.
and you would know it because they are
So are those people
if you get your message
at
be
the
like
table or because they're often
does that
not
make sense?
able to
Velocity as well as
do you have a process that
So I can give you some prompts. So
that would be kind of, that would be a
yeah,
question to
so
ask
if,
about.
so for example, if you're choosing for did you choose those areas?
That's as far as I
You know, a lot of our adaptations.
Did you choose those areas as being?
Yeah, you're right. Mr. Torres. Hey, the end result is we want more fish.
Not a biologist.
That's a good one.
Consider different
There
those are different things that you might want to consider when making the decision that have accounted for those activities. So it's and people to create
How much is it that controls what sort of the project? Because a lot of the things that we want to measure.
So basically,
the
if you
outcome
consider
of things,
sensor institute
they're
or
measured
indicator
at
recovery
where
there may be other identifiers or sources of identity of possible every metric so exactly what range of error or it might be okay to have use X number of
have that role in that process. So,
do you know what I'm saying? Like,
we can also have successful decisions.
protect our
That process so we can make everybody more
Yeah.
So does that mean that successful? If you've essentially disenfranchised the people managing who were interested in ways, and now they're so mad that you've lost their trust. So you need more confidence.
yes. I mean, again, that would be a different example.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's not that easy to realize that we can look at
Because
particular dimensions. So that trajectory
if you bring up an idea,
specific decisions. or that. So in the beginning, you still do want to pick something generally in depth
At least the idea was brought up.
But then when you pick
And one of the interesting things is how he
identifying priority areas or like
is that once by your enemies or by your friends or by your don't care what we else but if you actually say what you believe, because that's part of the solution, is for most of this is to actually say what you know or what you believe is true, whether regardless of what effects that makes. Because the little example that we pointed out, there's an individual that hates the drug and has their family has forever. But we brought up issue after issue after issue.
Sure.
Finally,
Yeah, no, that's nice. So
they're starting to
yeah, so
understand
you could
what
use
we're saying or what we try to say is actually real, and it's something that they have to deal with. If we hadn't done that, if we hadn't communicated our anger towards that process, that would have never happened. It would still be the loggerheads, it would still be the divisions, it would still be the hates. Anyhow, it's just as much
So that sounds almost like yeah, so the indicators are also things that can somehow measure those costs. You know what I mean? Those are some metrics. Yeah, those are something you can measure to show that you did that process.
No, this is the facilitator's guide, so, meaning that the idea was that we didn't want to, increase our those, these are the things that we would identify, but there are certainly things that will be, actually give our policies, which,
yes, exactly.
One thing that is occurring to me right now is that, especially going through like emphasizing being really granular at the beginning, as far as specific actions. And I know often, especially when you read through like the first generation of adaptation plans, it's kind of this big, like sweeping goals that are articulated, and no one really like goes down to the refining of like names, suites of options, specific actions. Okay, so I hold that thought. I have to leave.
otherwise, we're gonna rotate, and I'm gonna have need come into it.
You've considered whether it's tractable.
Sheet is decision making. So you're gonna be looking on the next one, take a look at the front, get your, we'll talk a little bit more about decision making, but take a look at what we mean by decision making and we'll start thinking about the table.
Opportunity costs of that? Well, I would argue that many others that are necessary. The issues are changing. Dimension start making more sense to most of you?
I'm leaving. You're good. This will be a ship on the fly.
I know. I think I know exactly. So now this is how easy yes. That's okay, just cross it out. Yes, well, you look familiar.
Madam Saggy, I'm Joe.
Hi, I'm Eve.
So I
We're gonna talk about decision making.
what were you guys okay. And it goes
Process. Oh, good. Okay. This is a good order then for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Going through our,
Actually, I think you might so you may never get to the process. We just assume that the process was the process.
That's okay if you review it in
I'll give a quick kind of 2-minute
So
rundown.
I am going to briefly talk about what we found in our first round around decision making to give you an idea of what you're going to do. It's a typical So for folks to start, future ground zero decision making. So the process dimension, you thought about what would make for a good adaptation process, right? Now you're talking about making actual decisions. So you have whatever adaptation process, adaptation effort you're interested in. You have to make some decisions. Maybe you want to increase the resilience of downtown Seattle. So you decide.
So the
How would you know that you need to have this decision? How would you know that you shouldn't build that seawall? And so some things that we came up with that would be characteristics of successful adaptation decision making. And this wasn't just around the seawall. This is stuff we came up with for all kinds of decisions. That it was based on
physical structure,
a broad consensus, so it was informed by multiple perspectives.
Some of them are also
The decision
more
is, and these are neither right nor wrong. The decision is actually tractable, it can be acted on. The decision was optimization based, so you actually considered multiple decisions based on some criteria. Came out that this was the optimal decision, so formal optimization process. You understood or you accounted for the opportunity costs of that decision. And so some indicators would be that for the opportunity costs, you actually did research to identify what those opportunity costs were. For metrics, you could have dollars lost in
salmon runs.
If you knew that there were dollars lost for various decisions, not for broad consensus and indicator whether you actually had workshops with multiple different kinds of experts or stakeholders.
I'll stop there.
The measures would be how many
Just take a couple
talked to
minutes.
or how you incorporated, how you accounted actually measured that consensus. To know whether the decision is tractable or not, some indicators would be that you actually did it. I guess we didn't get that far, but I guess to know if it's tractable, maybe someone has already done that. So that Tacoma built this seawall, so we know you can build a seawall. It's actually tractable. The metric would be, I guess, how many seawalls are built. Optimization based indicator would be that you actually use something like MarkSand, an optimization tool to identify that optimal strategy. MarkSand, so it's a conservation tool that optimizes decisions based on criteria that you give it or that it provides for you. So there are formal optimization tools out there, and the metric would be whatever is spat out by MarkSand, is like a score or something. However you came up with. So those are examples that we came up with at the previous table. So why don't you guys take some time to think about whether there are any additional traits or indicators that would be associated with this success in decision making that I did not mention, because there are likely several more coming. And this is about your whatever you pick. So how would you know that you will be successful?
My adaptations thought pattern is to transplant native species to a habitat in which they can survive certain conditions. Again, the consensus is a really good idea. Documenting that success can be done in the short term if they actually establish, maintain themselves, reproduce appropriately.
I struggle to give feedback.
So everyone will take like 5 minutes to write and compare those.
Yeah.
So specifically on metrics,
so you should be on the decision making page. So we're not going to so you can focus on one. So characteristics.
Yes, absolutely.
So how would you know that was the right decision? What would characterize it? And then how would you know that it was in fact whatever that characteristic was? So besides, how would you know it was and then how would you measure that? We looked at 50 papers. We talked about
that's where I struggle with an indicator like that.
But I think you're too.
So can we keep these?
Yes, definitely. Do you want to report back to me? Did you have any characteristics that appeals to you?
The one that I had was going to this, what I said was Russian. So it'd be approaching the tribal council with the issue, indicators that they actually try to assess, and the matrix would be this, that would be actual discussion of the issue, and then the audience would be the community, and
Yeah, I think it, yeah,
discuss, you know,
executing and
tribal
you're just doing the thing.
So knowing that you made this, knowing that, so is the decision to remove the space of
It would be the tribal council, would make the decision to move the tribal center.
Oh, the tribal center.
Yeah.
Move the tribal center.
And a lot of the houses have population, that's what we've done, that's what we're doing.
And so the characteristics that, so if it was the right, if it was a good decision to move
It might
the
be,
7 office levels, then the characteristics that made it a good decision would be that
because you're starting to bring it
that decision was approved by the tribal council, or was informed by the tribal council.
can't just go and fence so it could be part of it.
And of course, we have, that would be made in discussion, and new housing has been built. There's now a new community center in the new area where the tribal center will be.
Another aspect
Very good.
To build on that, one of my outcomes for talking
Taking
tribal treaties.
a lot of the community.
that would fill your tank.
And so you're not
So,
looking.
and
But it
going
may
through
not
the first process there, you know, letting individuals
so
know
what
why
is
it was important, you know, giving the indicators that flooding, massive flooding would happen, and then encroachment.
What more is it besides just going to the train?
So did anyone else come up with different characteristics of success? I agree with you.
Yeah.
So I have some sort of kind of benefit.
Keep working. I'm sorry, make sure people work for it.
Some sort of benefit barrier analysis too. So with each potential decision, knowing what the hurdles will be, not even if it's implementable, but some kind of assessment, whether it's political, technical, community resistance, that sort of thing. Whether the decision has co-benefits with other efforts as well, not only mitigation, but if it's doing something else that would be beneficial. The level of support of the decision from the community. And then I lump this in process before, but I think it probably goes into decision making, but kind of the looking at best practices, using that to inform decisions.
So what would your
It does.
indicator
So
Sometimes it can really be
for the kind of the benefit barriers thing, it would just be kind of a listing out.
so the indicator would be that you had listed it out.
Yeah. For co-benefits, it was kind of the number of other impacts or efforts and support, and also kind of the degree that it helps those. I had to come up with an indicator for the decision being supported by the community. But that could be, you know, targeted involvement either in like kind of a stakeholder workshop process or some sort of like participation process. Yeah.
and the incentives for doing
And then
it.
for the best practices, generating a list of options and then kind of X number of experts consulted or X number of like workshops held.
There may be relationships. I think that is
Sorry, I missed the last one. So the indicator of best practices.
different process.
Consulting with experts or holding workshops.
Like a metrics where the water is going
Pull through.
They're like money saved or like a percent change in outcomes. the co-benefits
I
would
know
be
one
kind of
came up
just
with that last table.
like a number or a range.
Counting up the number of projects, counting up the amount of money spent on things. No, I thought in my head that one might
Yeah,
be,
and then
let's
I guess
use the
the
process. You know, just saying how much money did we spend
number of
on
community members
or how
involved.
many
I mean, you'd want more nuance than that too, especially when you're talking about vulnerable populations
something
that
together
you
or
want to
actually
come out to the workshop or not necessarily people that you
more efficient. Whereas the amount of money
the best practices, just, I guess, numbers.
so there, I can see there's
numbers.
I can see both sides. That there are some that carry through all steps, and then some characteristics and metrics that actually
Any other
you want to look one way on one step and look differently.
So there'd be
I think we
examples
kind of got into
like
that if you're gonna
process
have different types of
and maybe
organizations.
that would be a small decision, but it might stop there.
Yeah.
And then because you made a decision not to implement it, and the things that we continue on with, they decided to implement based on something.
Yeah, almost like a Gantt chart.
Yeah.
You've seen how it's involved.
So if you had started the process, we might have to
And you might have some new things in it.
So that would be in our
So
project,
indicators.
right?
Also, an indicator would be the, how many came, but also
Any other
range, so you have targets.
different projects or different types of implementation.
So that's actually, right, so that's sort of like the metrics that people would see that many came, or like there were many. I mean, it's so subtle, but it's just that many. You had a lot of different stakeholders, and then the metric would be how many, right? So it's super subtle, I mean, we're parsing it, but, okay, so indicator would be.
The account.
Yeah.
Something. It's too subtle for me.
Yeah. So I mean, it's yes, we're saying the same thing.
Participation.
You had broad participation. That participation, that's the indicator.
Indicator is participation.
Yeah.
How many?
So you say, you go through that whole process and then you implementation indicator will be adherent
Really, yeah, kind of using one of the other steps to sort out an issue. One that I'm always getting the characteristics. I'm sorry. Durability is one thing.
So that to me sounds like adaptive management.
As you're doing
That also you know what I mean? And so so the indicator would be more that you have
it is not having yeah, two adaptive project. You know, this go build a desk.
the adaptive, I think an adaptive certainly suggests that you can work with yourself, but it also suggests that things change.
I was gonna say, I hadn't really thought about that, but that's something.
So that's really good. So what would your metric be for considering that?
You're dealing with uncertainty. When you're dealing with uncertainty, you still have to make a decision based on the best information available. A lot of times it's sort of a path of least permanent results in the sense that you don't want to make
Maybe how many,
decisions that more information might have.
different scenarios?
Yeah.
So the number of like climate change models, the number of scenarios. So the indicator would be that you considered it. So you considered
Good scientists will always put everything in probabilistic terms, but of course, it's not doesn't like that.
that you actually looked at
Things are
sources
gonna happen all the time.
explicitly, exact sources.
Yeah.
So that you can tell us. Because you were so sad, I think just.
And I can also think of ways that reverse it.
Yeah, and it is.
Terrible. One that I was thinking
Got one more
national
that I
flood
just so like prioritizing actions based on funding streams. So whether they currently
that would be
exist,
great.
like not necessarily dismissing an action, but if there isn't currently funding for it,
2012 actually got
get that,
rescinded
probably
by some of the same provisions that we did. So it was a reversal.
Someone else had suggested
But
about
that
tractability, so this is like a cousin of that one.
So
An
the outcome
indicator
was-
would be,
But there's lots of other.
existence of funding.
or that you looked at if you had funding, right?
Yeah, I think these are tricky because as far as I don't know.
And the metric would be,
I mean, there's a lot in adaptation frameworks.
that's true. Or you could say like how many databases of fundraising you had, like how many different organizations did you, how many different foundations or different RFPs or something, you know what I mean? It could be an actual number associated with your evaluations.
Or it could just be action prioritizing actions.
Did you do work on Dunkford cold snap and germination?
I do that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah, I recognize your name. Love your picture.
10 minutes? To listen in. Yeah, okay.
Well, it's having, we have like 10 minutes for this one? Yeah, well, I'm gonna say 12.
Hello. I'm Joe.
Okay, last week.
Hi, Joe.
So did you guys just do decision making?
We did.
And before that process? Alright, so we're going kind of in chronological order, or at least the order that we put in. So, I can try to give a quick 2-minute discussion of what the last 2 tables have spoke about. And some of the decisions people had were really interesting. Some restoring natural flow in rivers, habitat restoration, flood risk reduction, more about convening and developing partnerships and workshops. And so among those lots and lots of different types of ways of not just thinking about whether you can do those things, but who might be involved, what types of the durability of some of these things as these are put in, whether they kind of continue on or can be reversed quickly, or and sometimes they're good to be reversible in your implementation. Other times you want to continue on. About counting up within your jurisdictional or programmatic silo, you know, what you do, staff, funds, and things like that, and to what extent that's kind of a natural thing to do, and to what extent counting other things that happen, other programs, to your goals and your concept of success. That was about it, and there was one suggestion I think which is good for just our process, that if we could come up with one project and step through all the different possible indicators and aspects of success, that might be helpful for the coordinating whole. Yeah.
We seem to struggle with the same definition.
Yeah. Is this implementation? Is this outcomes? Yeah. So anyway,
I think it means more they weren't allowed to go to step 2 until everyone has completed step 1 or something like that. I'm not used to that. So I like to jump to the end and skip back and forward.
Well, for me too, there's a bit of like bleed between things. Like, so even if you had between the city and people wanting about addressing stress and problems. So is your decision we will have a strategy with filling stations, or is your decision there will be a filling station here by this time? And so like, which of that is an implementation, which is that like the decision process?
yeah. Well, I think that they're kind of both, you know. You can say that the decision is going to influence the and the implementation could be, okay, we put in cooling stations here, here, but that the information about, say, where should they go, or how to design them, kind of brings up, I think, an aspect of implementation related to specificity. You know, and I think that that's something, I know we see this a lot in adaptation, but there's not much specificity. And therefore it becomes a barrier to implementation because no one ever kind of went through. And so I think that there is, you can define these steps. It's very flexible as where one starts and where one ends. But some of the characteristics can be very important for success. And one other thing at the last table we talked about is how some of the characteristics actually can be built. So inclusivity was one that we talked about for both jobs and maintaining that habitat. And that having a lot of partners was really important because a lot of people actually manage the lands and have impacts on the water. But that's also important in the process side of things, that if they're not buying into the solution, you probably never get to a good decision in the first place. And so that some of the characteristics actually span many phases. Whereas some other characteristics, depending on how much staff and money you spend, may actually be something that would be an indicator of inefficiency on the process side, but could be an indicator of success. So, in some cases, the same aspect could point in different directions of success. And other times, they're actually consistently across.
I hear lots of working within one's own political unit or working through gain all these characteristics of success is another way of considering success to gain support from a wider element of society. Like working in a city, you also want to have county board or state. Is that an issue here to discuss?
Yes. Yeah. In short.
I think that could be go both ways, you're saying too. I mean, it could be a barrier that kept you from specific outcome, but you could end up being, that was a really successful process. That was an end point in itself.
Yeah.
Success, and then your next phase might be to then take what you know and get there. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sometimes, and with respect to implementation specifically, sometimes too many cooks in the kitchen doesn't do very well, and other times it's really critical that you're actually undercutting yourself if you don't have public support. So, I didn't actually give you some time to jot down some notes about implementation and just kind of jump into it. But we'll be on the fly for anyone who wants to talk about their project and some aspects of success in implementation, shooting from the hip.
I definitely think I started this whole thing looking way too broad and not breaking things out enough. It's hard for me to pull in a very small bits of it going to do implementation versus decision.
Yeah. I am subscribing to that too.
My topic was trying to improve forest health and enhance biodiversity. Same process. And so, in my last one for decision making, for instance, one of the things we want to do is have, say, biodiversity surveys. We said we want to do, so then in implementation, all right, we're going to have to decide, to go back to decision making, what kind of biodiversity surveys are what are your methods there. So then you're implementing it, when you're doing it
How many businesses that you're contracting with it could be very impressive.
So again, I think my tendency is to get big with it really quickly.
Yeah.
To chase it all the way down the line.
And I'm trying to draw out kind of what is a general aspect associated with that. It might be a little bit related to specificity, but it may be like maybe chooses the appropriate technique, or that, you know, it's which again, the process or decision making, you know, the goal may not be that important, but for the implementation, it is.
I'm struggling with where, I guess, like implementation and outcomes. So,
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
the implementation, so there's, I think staff used in these times, but even just like, so if I'm dealing with polling stations, that they're built, it's implemented.
Yeah.
But if people don't go to them and use them, this is great, then that's not, but is that like, do we recognize that early in the process and then you add an information campaign, which is part of your traction?
So I think it's just
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, too, with the outcomes, like, I'm also hesitant to call a successful outcome just
People going.
people use it,
Right.
because the ultimate outcome is that you have a decrease in morbidity.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see people being kind of quick into implementation. But it's true, you know, is that enough? It is having to frame the success. I mean, if your big success is we need to get people to show up, well then that's people showing up as an outcome. But if your big success is we need to improve health and health outcomes, then I think we can dial back the showing up. But I think the more instructive part is that how does it start to affect your process and decision making? You know, okay, well, we actually have to think about some sort of advertising. Actually, we can't just plot these things in the third floor of an office building. We have to think about its location and let people know that it's there.
If we don't do this, and sort of secondary metrics get interesting too. Like, let's say you do this and you have a big campaign, it actually just gets people's minds planning, preparing, structuring their lives better.
Yeah.
How do you measure secondary?
Yeah, because in a weird way, it would be ideal if no one came, but everybody was healthy.
Yeah.
Right? You know, that they didn't have to go to a polling center, that within their neighborhood or within their community and find a place or have one. And, you know, in a way, how do you planning to put yourself out of business? But maybe that's,
within your
right.
Well, then you get into the like, if you consider like the polling stations pilot project, then the ethics of only, you know, you need to control the pilot project. So the ethics for some people versus on others. If you want to do like a rigorous evaluation, it's a good
But that's part of the implementation, whether or not something's practical. So it could be put in a pilot scale. 2 neighborhoods.
Or you can plan for that sunsetting, but still stuck as part of, you know, that you do it for a certain amount of time. You have the stations available, and then the hope is that you, over time, draw, replace them with something else.
But that also
Is that the reverse?
That could be, yeah, that we're not committing to funding polling stations that are, you know, perhaps expensive. Displace what might otherwise be potential public health in these communities. I don't really believe
Yeah, well,
that.
I would say it's, for my work, development, some guidelines, that reversible sunsetting aspect of it could be that they would be redefined.
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
So I guess the indicator would be set up a check back time or something in that metric where you actually did it.
Yeah.
Set up some kind of
like implementation flexibility or
Thinking about feedback, timeline, issues. they're alive, to see the outcome. So that another aspect could be considered education of members of my tribe who attended this. That's an education. That's another clinic. Reports are
Right. Yeah, it's nice to raise awareness to, yeah, to form up.
Not to get all the way through.
Okay.
4 states, 2 countries.
So where are we here?
We just gonna sum up table by table?
We're just gonna.
Yeah, I think we're gonna do.
Oh, there you are.
Hi.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. So everyone, thank you for embarking with us on this whirlwind tour of adaptation success. You guys are all really great humored on us trying to do a lot in a small amount of time, but I think from the conversations I had, the goal was accomplished, which was to stimulate some thinking and to maybe give you, something to take away with you that may stimulate further thinking. So to make sure we don't miss out on lunch, I want to just do a really quick wrap up, table by table. If the table captain could tell us some things that were interesting. I'm not even going to ask, give us the summary of exactly what adaptation success is in terms of an adaptation process, please. Lara.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start real quick. So I would say that one of the things that became very clear, I mean, even early on in the exercise, was just this question of what is the scale at which we're trying to address this question. So when we talked about adaptation efforts, it's one thing to have these questions centered around a specific action, like I'm going to build a white span or increase the width of our bridges, using the King County example, to accommodate for flooding. So that versus a much bigger goal of something else that then becomes a little bit harder to compartmentalize. So we did talk through that, and recognizing that there is a need to think about success at that broader level, we tried to bring it down to more specific actions. We had a number of issues that were identified. So there's inclusivity. I was definitely bringing in, making sure that your process reaches to disenfranchised communities, to make sure that you're going to them. The multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral aspects, making sure your process is recognizing that. We also talked about the need to make sure that your process is sanctioned or supported, so that when you're engaging in this process, it's seen as being legitimate by the people at the table. That people are engaged through the process. So it's not one thing. It's not just one thing to have people at the table, but you need to have them there and participating actively through the process. And also the need to translate, so that when you're having this process, you're using terms and talking about things in ways that people resonate with. A great example, the woman over there, I'm sorry, the black shirt, who mentioned that local government will put in something about somebody's put in a permit to take out 4 CFS from the groundwater table. Well, what does that mean? So just a need to help translate that. And then the last thing I'll mention is, all the tables that I was at definitely mentioned filling in the information gaps. So that's part of the process, is making sure that as you're going into maybe more of the public process of reaching a decision, and you've got the information, that you need to engage in that process.
Wonderful, thank you. Mead, you want to go next about adaptation decision making?
Yes. So we were looking at the decision making, or all of you were looking at the decision making dimension. So if whatever decision you actually decide to make, how do you know that it was a good decision or the right decision? And so I think we came up with a ton of characteristics and indicators and metrics, and I would put them maybe into 3 bins. The first was around sort of the science and rigor behind that decision. So was it based on good science? Indicator B, you did a lit review, or you talked to experts. So metric B, how many experts, how many lit reviews, that kind of thing. Did you consider uncertainty in your wanting a transparent decision process, but then recognizing that for tractability and considering social costs, sometimes transparency wasn't ideal in that you had to provide some political cover and privacy for certain landowners, for example, for implementing certain things, so that they wouldn't lose business or be publicly shamed for coming out as being supporting climate decision. So that's the summary of what we got.
Great. Joe is next for implementation.
Okay, so sometimes implementation was a really easy one in the sense of just, oh, well, did you go do the thing that you said you were going to do? But we quickly found, I think, a lot of different twists and turns to that story. So one category of topics, I think, was one of just due diligence. Did you come up with a plan, or are you, that kind of considers different aspects, whether it be can you afford things, or what is the locations that you're going to make your interventions in the landscape, the types of contractors you're going to use, kind of all those parts of the plan, which sometimes get left off when we're talking about adaptation planning, and therefore we never get to the implementation stuff. Two kind of contradictory ideas that both came up, one of durability and one of reversibility. So durability, the idea that when we do things that they can kind of stick, whether it be through educating, informing some of the partners involved, or actually having a wide range of partners, doing things that if we're doing building codes came up, that they're actually enforced and people who are responsible for those codes know how to assist. But then the flexibility or reversibility part was often we're making decisions in the face of uncertainty, and do we have an ability to change course or to alter as new information comes about, or as future monitoring goes on. Inclusiveness is one that came up a lot, and also not just talking about inclusiveness within the implementation phase, but how that may actually relate to other dimensions of the kind of success assessments, whether it be in the process or in the decision making. And we did talk a lot about just, I think, links among different parts. So inclusivity may be great, for example, in process, but it may actually be a challenge when you get to implementation if you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So thinking about when those aspects, those metrics may point in the same direction across multiple dimensions of the decision, whereas they may point in opposite directions at different times.
Great. So we were speaking about outcomes, and this is a very interesting conversation because it's sort of after everything happens, what have you got? What have you done? So we talked about this in a bunch of different ways. One of the things that came up was thinking about the state of the system, either a healthy ecosystem that you're trying to develop or maintain, a healthy economy, or an absence of bad things because disasters didn't hurt or damages did not occur. And this led a whole bunch of different issues, right? So the idea that often the outcome that we see is actually embedded in a broader set of outcomes. So we think about salmon recovery being insufficient on its own when the goal is also to have salmon recovery in a vibrant rural economy, right? So this brings in lots of things about who needs to be involved and what strategies and tactics you might be if the outcomes are framed in that way. We also discussed in many cases those outcomes, they're the big lofty vision, right? And they may not be, are likely not, completely under your control. And there's many other actors and many other forces at work. And one great suggestion is that by actually framing the outcomes as big as they are as a vision and thinking about where the major levers and impediments are, you might actually do different strategies. You might employ different methods to actually, if the goal is really the big change on the landscape as opposed to the purview of your commission agency. And so now we start talking really Lara, like Amy's happy world where we work across our objectives. A big question is about these things being achievable when they're bigger than us. The question is whether maybe the way we define success sort of reverts to talking about the process of it. So as opposed to we have a certain state on the ground, are we happy with how we've managed ourselves through the transition or through the changes that occur? So that gets to the other dimension of outcomes, which is not so much what you look at, what you see when you look out at the world, but how we've set ourselves up for dealing with those changes. And so successful outcomes might be the ability to deal with ongoing change, built into our institutional arrangements, the need to update and revisit as climate continues to change and science continues to evolve. We also thought about successful outcomes in terms of whether they build momentum, whether they create the success, create the support necessary to maintain progress. So in terms of does everyone involved think this was a success? That would be a great outcome. If everyone involved in this effort thought it was good, and agree with us, not only did the changes on the landscape occur, but we all think that they were positive and that they made a benefit so that we can continue on with the next steps that are needed. Then, of course, there's the challenges, which is that when we talk about outcomes, we really have to face squarely that sticky question I raise is who gets to decide what success is? And when there are different opinions and there's different, very different power dimensions involved, it's a question not only of how we define it, but how we get there. So with that, take a deep breath and have a lovely lunch. And thank you for a really, really interesting set of conversations.
Amy, do you have time for one question?
Oh, absolutely. We can stay. I just didn't want to make you stay. Yeah.
I was wondering if you have an example of a city or an adaptation effort that took either kind of like a granular approach or had a more rigorous process. Like I'm thinking maybe like second or third generation of adaptation plans was trying to have kind of a step-by-step process and then also document the process. So one of my frustrations in reading adaptation plans is to get the output. We can often have no idea how to go about
No, I was going to ask the four of us to type up what can we read it?
I think you could.
I want to.
I don't think I can do it before I leave.
I need to get from you what you're saying, and I didn't write down what you said. So
here's
somehow a brain
my summary thing. If maybe, like, I hate to say it, but maybe like Melon or somebody in our area actually heard to do the draft. But if someone could like put a draft of this together for me, I had time to go through and be like, oh, that's
this is what I meant.
This is what I meant. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, happy to do that. I want to get it out of your brain before away in the easiest way to use. So
that would be easy. If someone could type that up for me, I can go through and revise, but realistically,
well, we need to talk about tomorrow.
yeah,
Like lunch or another time. You tell me when it's good for you. And it seems very linear.
maybe tomorrow morning I can
It's going to be away.
that would be such a tidy.
So I think it's a great idea. I think we should do it. I just had an idea about saying we could have it. So we'll talk about it.
It's 5 cents a year.
I'm sure you have some examples. One that I always think that we had to describe. I know. We don't know what
I was just trying to think that. Okay, so which because the Gina's actually really not the same, even that's right.
Okay.
So I don't, at the moment, I haven't managed grants in years.
Not concerned, but what are they? And then, and what do we know about how they're what climate impacts are all
Okay,
And now I'm
so when we
also
were
getting
dealing with
involved
the,
and then they crosswalk, and they say,
But I didn't find that to near-term, medium-term goals.
and then you've been on the process with efficiency.
Yes.
And all of that.
Can't wait to
Okay, so that's where we're looking at.
Yes.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
and they talk about all
you're gonna have to meet people
parsing
where
out,
they're at.
and then they say,
We'll have to talk more one of these days, you know, I see you once like every 5 years and then.
objectives.
Work with Elizabeth.
And are
You
how,
know, we're supposed to be friends, but
or another way of putting it is, given those community objectives of change, at which time period in the future, that process of time is, what do we expect them to be, and are we confident? So they have in, I think it's in the back of their vulnerability assessment,
tell you guys what I'm doing.
if not, they make them available.
I'm still gonna be the team lead.
They're these color-coded spreadsheets of every planning objective, short, medium, and long-term, high, and
Integrating
low
climate change
confidence.
modeling.
Really, that's their, and combined then with risk assessment and risk mapping, you know, physics.
Yeah, I bet